Here we are, back to Mr. Tucket. We are now at chapter 15. When the men and horses were still some 200 yards away, they stopped. One man dismounted and studied the soft ground of the meadow. He turned and said something to the man who was still mounted, and then swung back into his saddle. From the way he dismounted and mounted, and the way they rode, Francis now realized that they weren't Indians. More than likely, especially since they had pack horses, they were trappers. He eased up from the rifle, but only a little. They could still be up to no good, and it didn't hurt to be ready. He watched for some sign of their intentions and got it when they were just 100 yards from the house. One of them slipped his rifle from its buckskin case and laid the gun across his lap. The other then did the same, and Francis could feel the hair on his neck rise. Nobody dropping in for a friendly visit would make a point of coming armed and ready. His cheek went back to the stock of his rifle. He turned to run out back and get the mountain men, but he didn't know how far he'd have to go, and if he left the pack mules and all their equipment alone, even for a minute, everything might be gone by the time they got back. No, he wouldn't leave. There was nothing else to do. He would simply have to stay and try to bluff them out. Approximately 30 yards from the house, the two men stopped. They were about 20 feet apart, sitting their horses loosely, but both of their rifles were aimed in the general direction of the lean-to. Francis could make out their features easily. One of them was rather short and bearded. The other was lean, also bearded, fairly tall, and it was he who leaned forward and in the saddle and called, "Yo, the house. Anybody home?" Francis said nothing. He watched. "Up there, the house," the man called again. "Anybody home?" They were getting uneasy. Francis could tell by the way the lean one angled his rifle upward as he. Francis could tell by the way the lean one angled his rifle upward as he talked. Even at that range, the muzzle looked like a cave. Might as well say something, he thought, before they just fire away. "Who are you, and what do you want?" he called, trying to make his voice sound gruff and older. "Name's Bridger," answered the lean one. "Jim, to people who come into the light. This here's my partner Jake Barnes, and all we want is a little hospitality." "Sure," thought Francis. "You're Jim Bridger, and I'm Kit Carson. If you really are Jim Bridger, you sure wouldn't just amble blind into a trap like this. How do you know I'm not an Indian? You could have been following anybody's tracks." That's what he's thinking in his head. Isn't that interesting? "You lost your tongue in there?" the lean one yelled back. "I said that the name's Bridger." "I heard you," Francis answered. The man was lying. He was sure of it. He brought up the front sight of his rifle. It made him feel funny aiming at a man, but he'd been caught off guard once by Braid, and it wasn't going to happen twice. "I'm not sure I believe it. Can you prove you're Jim Bridger?" "Prove? What's to prove? I'm just sitting here, ain't I? I said I was Bridger, didn't I? What more do you need?" There it was. He said he was Bridger, but Francis was positive he was lying, and so they were stalemated. There was nothing to do but wait for Mr. Grimes. "If you're really Jim Bridger," Francis called, "you won't mind just sitting there for a while." "What for?" Until somebody comes who can tell me if that's the truth. And what if I decide to ride off or come plowing at you? I've got my gun on you. I figured that. I'll use it, maybe. When's this man coming?" "Soon." "What's his name?" "You don't need to know." "All right, I'll wait for a spell, but if he doesn't come soon, and I mean soon, you better figure on using that gun." The minutes dragged, the sun got hotter, and flies began buzzing around the horses. He had no idea how long Mr. Grimes would be gone, Francis realized. Somehow, half an hour crawled past. It was the longest half hour of his life, and Bridger, or the man who said he was Bridger, didn't help any. If he had gotten nervous or started to move around, Francis would have felt better, but he didn't. He just sat his horse, cool, calm, waiting, and the smaller man did the same. 40 minutes passed, 50, then an hour was gone, and that was enough. The lean one moved. He straightened in his saddle and called, "Time's up. I haven't got 10 years to waste. Now I'm going to turn around and ride out of here. My partner's coming with me. I don't think you'll touch anything off, but if you do, you'll get only one of us, and the other one will get you just as sure as winter's coming." This was it then, the test. Francis reset his sight. It would be suicide to let the man go. He and his partner might ride off a mile, turn around, and sneak back to kill them at night. Even as the lean one turned his horse and the partners followed suit, Francis knew he couldn't do it. It was one thing to shoot somebody who was attacking you, but to just come out and shoot a man because you thought he might be lying. Jim Bridger, the voice was loud, cutting through Francis's thoughts. It came from the side of a clearing he couldn't see, but he knew that voice. It belonged to Mr. Grimes, Jason Grimes. You figured on riding out of here without taking a cup of coffee with an old friend? The two men stopped their horses. I figured you was up here somewhere, the lean one said. And to be downright truthful about it all, I did stop for some coffee. I figured old Jason Grimes was as good as the next for a free spot of Java. But before you get all relaxed about us stopping for a while, maybe you ought to know there's a two-legged terrier in the shack over there with a gun on us. Shouldn't we ask him about stopping? What? Mr. Grimes turned to the building. Oh, how long you been in here? Been here? Seems like 10 years, Jake Barnes said. Maybe an hour, really. And Mr. Tucket kept you at bay all that time? Who? Jim Bridger asked. Mr. Tucket. Mr. Grimes turned again to the building. Mr. Tucket, come on out here and meet the men you've been holding. So it was Bridger. Francis felt like an idiot. Still, he couldn't stay out of sight forever. He stepped out of the doorway and walked toward the horses. Why, it ain't nothing but a cub, said Jim Bridger, snorted. Jake, we've been sitting here worried about a cub. That broke the ice, and the two men dismounted, grinning at Francis. Where'd you get him? Bridger asked. While Francis made a fire, Mr. Grimes told the two mountain men about him, but by the time the explanation was finished, the coffee was ready, and they all sipped it and chewed on venison. After that, the men smoked, and Francis sat quietly thinking. There was something bothering him. Finally, he could hold it no longer. Mr. Bridger, he asked, how did you find us? Well, we just followed your trail, boy. Easy as following a herd of buffalo. But don't worry, we covered tracks coming in. Ours and yours. Francis looked at Mr. Grimes. He was smiling. Oh, he exclaimed, you're feeding Mr. Tucket a nettle. Bad for his liver. The fact is, Mr. Tucket, there's another meadow like this up a ways that belongs to Mr. Bridger. I found this one last year about the same time he found his, and we met coming out, so he knew I'd be here about now. Unless I miss my guess, he's on his way up there now. Bridger nodded. Caught cold turkey. Boy, never lie in front of Jason Grimes. You will lose every time. Say, he turned to Mr. Grimes, how are you and Braid getting on lately? That triggered off another round of talk. They covered the Indian tribes, Pawnee, Sioux, and finally, while Francis made another pot of coffee, the Crow. You might be extra careful when you go out, Bridger told Mr. Grimes. We saw some fresh crow sign down at the mouth of the valley. Whole tribe, men, women, child, and dog. Man, woman, child, and dog. Looking for a wintering ground, I reckon, so they probably won't bother you, but I don't think they'd pass up a chance at these rifles if they ran across you. Mr. Grimes nodded. The crows and the weather. You can't tell about either one, but I think I'd take a blizzard to a crow any day. Francis listened to them intently. His stomach was full of warm coffee and jerky. Evening was coming on. The fire felt good, and he was in the company of a living legend, Jim Bridger. What more could he ask? Why think about such unpleasant things as snowstorms or Indians at any time like this? Better just listen, because someday he would want to tell his family everything about this meeting with the fabulous Jim Bridger. So there you go. That's who those two guys were. There we have it. Be back later. Bye.